Gear is a funny thing. Equipment's a funny thing. The advance in technology has been extraordinary. I now have a Kemper profiling amp, and I don't use valve amps anymore. I've got a studio full of valve amps. I haven't turned any of them on for the best part of a year. I profiled them all. That's what I use. One of the reasons to do it is that I do a lot of online sessions, and quite often I'll do a guitar track for somebody and it will be 3, 4, 5 days before they get back to me. I can't leave a mic in front of an amp for 5 days. I'm constantly doing different stuff. So I've profiled all my amps, and that's what I use because I can just save the sound and recall it. And I can't tell the difference. And some of the real old valve purists, whose names I won't mention in public, but they'll know who they are, won't they, Whittleborn and Whittlehorn, have started using Kemper as well, because you can't tell the difference. It was always inevitable. Somebody was going to figure it out sooner or later. How the process of digitizing is that you turn a curve into a series of steps, and then you attempt to turn the series of steps back into the same curve. The finer the resolution of the number of steps you use to record the curve, if you like, the more accurate your recreation of the curve is going to be. And increases in processing power have arrived at a point now where processors are fast enough that you can take so many snapshots of the curve that you really, really can't tell the difference. And I go out gigging with the Kemper now, and I forget that I'm not playing a valve amp until it comes time to lift it up and put it back in the car. And then I remember, my God, that's so light. I'm not playing a valve amp anymore. Technology is marching ahead at a huge rate. And it's had a lot of interesting implications for musicians, one of which, for session musicians, is that you can now record yourself to a professional standard, if you learn how to do it, in your own house. And if you're smart, particularly if you're a singer, you should be doing sessions all day, because there are so many people out there looking for vocalists. If you're a drummer, you should get together with a few mates and make yourselves a nice room that you share with some nice equipment, a few nice mics, learn how to record yourself. You'd be working every week. You'd be working. The kind of democratization that has taken place has been fascinating. I've watched the studio business change hugely. Before affordable digital recording, also known as a laptop or a desktop computer, before affordable digital recording, if you wanted to make a record, you had to go to a very specialised facility, which you rented for a lot of money, and you paid for very experienced and knowledgeable people to operate it. And if you wanted to have a guitar player on that record, or a sax player or whatever that you couldn't play yourself, you hired somebody who had to be able to do it first or second time, because the studio was costing you £100 an hour, $100 an hour. You couldn't afford to spend all afternoon mucking around. You needed people who could do it quickly and well. When affordable digital recording appeared, the whole concept changed. Suddenly you could actually, instead of having to hire this very expensive place, you could do it at home with your mate, who might not be the best guitarist in the world, but you could muck about all afternoon and you'd come up with something that was usable. And suddenly people were able to make records without having to have the huge budgets that you needed to go into these expensive studios. At the same time, things like Napster appeared, and as the internet first appeared, it became obvious that this was going to spell trouble for the sales of recorded music unless somebody got a grip on it, and they didn't. When piracy started, successive governments just went, it's pop musicians, they're probably all high on drugs, pff, whatever. And nobody did anything about it. The film and TV industry was smart. They watched what happened to the music industry and they took steps to prevent this happening to them. But even they have got similar constraints appearing on them. How long people like Netflix will be able to go on making high budget productions remains to be seen, because the music industry, for example, instead of selling a £10 product on a piece of plastic that was very hard to copy, but that you made 50% profit on, you now sell or rent a £1 or $1 product. And 50% of a dollar, if you get 50%, if you're lucky, is only 50 cents, not £5 or $5. So the industry has had to face a tenfold reduction in its revenues, which nearly brought it to its knees. Film and TV are looking at that and realising, hang on, we need to take steps to avoid this happening. Recent technological developments, however, have brought the first positive signs for as long as I've known the internet to survive, to be in existence. I remember back in the late 90s going to an internet cafe and paying, I don't know, £3 for a cup of coffee and 45 minutes on a computer that was connected to the internet, and bringing up these pages of text from all over the world and searching anything I liked, and there it was. There was this information in front of me. And my first reaction was, okay, this is a massive, massive revolution, which indeed it turned out to be. My second thought was, copyright is dead unless governments get a handle on this, and they didn't. And sure enough, copyright became not dead, but hugely threatened. And whatever creative industry you're in, if you digitize your work and put it on the internet, it gets stolen. Whether you're a photographer, a journalist, a visual artist, a musician, if you digitize your work and put it on the net, it can be stolen. And if it can be stolen, it will be stolen. However, the emergence of blockchain technology gives the first sign of hope that there are ways of protecting your intellectual property. I've got music out on blockchain sites. I get 5 times the streaming rate that I get on Spotify, and no one can nick it. I've also done collaborative projects where instead of having to hire a lawyer and an accountant to draw up the agreements with the people I'm collaborating with and then every quarter do the accounts, it's just written in to the blockchain token that my music is digitized at, and all that stuff happens automatically. So that's the first kind of good news. But the technical revolution from multi-track tape to a laptop has been extraordinary, and it's kind of the old hippie and the communist in me likes the idea that it has democratized the means of production and distribution, and the workers and the producers now can produce and distribute without having to go cap in hand to record companies or financial interests. It's not all good. It means that there's an awful lot of stuff out there that's genuinely quite shocking because there's no filters on it anymore. It's different. And a lot of my generation of musicians complain about it. But when I teach in universities, I see a generation of musicians inventing their own version of the music business and finding ways of making this work. It's also been very interesting to start looking at it and thinking about the function and the role of the pop musician in society for probably 50 years, between about 1950 and about 2000, or maybe 1960 and 2010 or whatever. There was this weird blip on the timeline of music where recorded music ruled the roost, and recorded music generated so much revenue that pop music could exist in a kind of cultural ghetto in isolation and didn't need to refer to other arts around it because it ruled the roost and generated huge amounts of money. But as that very short blip on the timeline of music has died away again, musicians have had to start to think about their functions. What are we for? What's the point of pop music? And also, as pop music, for my generation, pop music was the centre of our cultural world, and it was our identifier. We identified who we were by what music we listened to, and that was what tribe we allied ourselves to. That's no longer the case. It's not just pop music. There's so much other stuff out there. Film, sports stars, computer games, all sorts of stuff out there, that pop music is not that important anymore. So what are the functions of the musician in society? Why do we do this? What are we for? And if you look back at the ancient functions of musicians in society, that's where the answer lies. And if you look at paintings and read accounts of events like the birth of a prince, the death of a peasant, the marriage of the village squire or whatever, always in the background you will see the minstrels in the gallery. They're there all the time. And popular musicians have always provided an important part of the cultural context in which any culture exists. This first came to me when, rather late in life, I did my first Jewish wedding as a musician. And I sat there playing offbeats in D minor, realising that this music has been played at these events. I think it was a bar mitzvah or something. This music has been played in this culture, in these events, for millennia. And it's a kind of shorthand to an understanding of your own culture, and it's how the culture's passed down. And what we call popular music, I prefer to call it vernacular music, if you like. It's not highbrow fine art music, it's vernacular music. Its functions before that distorting blip of recorded music have always been to document a culture, to give people a shortcut into their culture. That's always been its function. And it's interesting watching it now. I've always played with function bands, wedding and party bands. I believe that to be as honourable a function of the minstrel as playing in football stadiums with megastars. And that function has always been there and will continue to be there. I think it always will be there. That's the true function of popular musicians in society. The other functions, I suppose, is fine art. There are fine art musicians out there. And there will be new functions and new ways of doing it that emerge. Bespoke songwriting. So it's an interesting time to be a pop musician. I started my career probably in the last 20, 30 years of that 50-year blip. And it ended under my feet. And we're now in a different era. and it's interesting to watch. Is it a good thing? I don't know. One thing that intrigues me when I teach is that I talk to young 18-year-old guitarists to say, what are you listening to? They say Hendrix, Clapton, Beck. And I go, what? What about the modern new guitarists? They go, nah, not really interested. And I used to wonder why, and then I understood. That generation of musicians did it in order not to have a career. It was an escape. It certainly was for me. When I was at school, when I started playing guitar, it offered me a way of not being an academic or an insurance salesman or a truck driver or whatever. And my generation did it in order not to have a career. Nowadays, people go to music colleges and study in order to have a career. And I think that has an effect on the way they play. And the generation of guitarists that they're talking about, the Hendrixes and what have you, they had an innocence about them, about what they did. They were making up the rules. No, there were no rules. Nobody had done this kind of thing before. And they have an innocence and an energy about them that doesn't exist now. People go to college in order to pursue a career as a pop musician, and that changes their intent. They do it for different reasons, and therefore they do it in a different way. The innocence has gone. During the course of my career, one of the things that I've become absolutely fascinated by is the psychology of performance. Why is it that you can take 5 actors and put them on the same stage in front of the same audience and give them the same lines to deliver, and with 4 of them you'll think, oh, good acting, but one of them you won't even think they're acting, you just believe them? Why is it that some people can command a space? I've stood on stage beside people who they walk onto the stage in a football stadium and you can feel the energy of 80,000 people focused through them. How do they do that? If you know, please let me know, because I don't know. And I'm still trying to figure it out, and it's a fascinating subject. You know when you're in the presence of a performer like that, don't you? You know. They just transport you. They carry you away. They're able to command the space. And they are able to drag you or pull you or invite you into their world. And somehow you become commanded by them. The Spanish have a word for it. They call it duende. And I've been trying to understand it for a long time, and it's fascinating. The only literature I can find on the subject is sports psychology, which is the exact opposite of the psychology of the performing arts, I think. Sports psychology is about competing. Got to be the best. I've got to be better than the person next to me. Performing arts psychology is the exact opposite of that. It's about cooperating and collaborating and being empathic towards the people around you. There is one book that I found by a Hungarian lady who was a child violinist, a violin prodigy, and was doing concert tours when she was 17. She gave it up when she was 19 or 20 to start a family, but she wrote a lovely book about performing. She addresses it from the point of view of overcoming stage fright for violinists. And she talks about how when you hold a violin, most violinists are contorted into this weird shape where you're gripping the thing with your chin and your hand's gripping it like that. And she said, how can you expect to play in a relaxed fashion when you're doing this? And she said, okay, relax. She said, hold out your hand as though you're giving somebody something. Now look at the shape of your hand. That's perfect. Now just rest the violin on your chin. You don't need to grip it. Now put your hand on the neck of the violin and now play. And the key to this was this word giving, this idea that when you perform, you give. The other things that have become clear about performing, and this is where I shout at the screen if I ever watch the X Factor, and my wife and daughters ban me from watching X Factor because I go on Facebook rants and issue death threats to Simon Cowell. So I don't watch it anymore. But if I do, the misunderstanding of the nature of performance is so profound. In the first place, the X Factor has got nothing to do with music. It's just the only way you can throw Christians to the lions on live TV. It's about humiliation and a story of triumph over adversity, blah, blah, blah. But the contestants are always encouraged to say, oh, tonight I've got to be really brilliant. And one of the secrets that I've learned about performance is that you cannot say that. You cannot make it happen. It is not within your power to be brilliant. If you have the gift, it will happen, but it will happen through you. You cannot switch it on and off. And this is why some artists go a bit crazy. I've watched artists walk into a stadium and look around them, and there's 120 crew, and there's a 16-piece band, and there's 80,000 people out there that have paid €100 to come and see you. And you think, what if tonight is the night that it doesn't work for me? And I walk onto the stage and start doing my thing, and the audience go, yeah, and? Because they've learned you cannot make it happen. You can do two things. First of all, you can learn to avoid the things that will stop it from happening. And one sure way to make sure that you don't deliver one of those transcendent performances is to think, I'm going to be really good tonight. You won't be. You've just killed it. You just shot it. You can't go on stage thinking, oh, I've got to be really good. So-and-so's in the audience. You won't be good. So you learn how to avoid that kind of stuff, and you develop a technical level of competence that means you'll get through the night. Even if inspiration doesn't strike and flow through you, you will get through the night. It won't be one of your greatest ever gigs, but you'll get through it. So this business of saying, oh, I've got to be really brilliant tonight, first of all, that's not for you to say. Secondly, when they say, oh, I'm going to give it 100% tonight, well, you should give it 100% every time you step onto the stage, otherwise you have no reason being there. And performance has become a fascinating subject. It's tied up with a lot of things, but I heard it expressed once as a mixture of courage and humility. You have the courage to step onto the stage in the first place, and the humility to realise that it ain't yours to control. It might happen, but it's not yours to control. And then we have the question of ego, and I've often caused great controversy when I hear people say, oh man, the singer in my band, he's got such an ego. I go, well, great. That's his job. As long as it is kept out of the rehearsal room, the hotel bar and the business meeting, that's his job. You know, I'm not going to pay money to go and see a bunch of people who've got no ego, who go, oh, look, we're not very good, we're going to play this song, I hope you like it. I'm not going to pay money for that. I want to pay money to go and be transported by people who have learned to allow their power to flow if it's going to flow, and who have sufficient ego to get up on stage. As I said, courage and humility. The courage to believe that I've got the right to do it in the first place, and the humility to understand that I don't control it. I am its servant. And when you realise this stuff, you start to have those brilliant performances much more often. I think one of the keys to understanding this was one night on tour. I think we'd done about 7 gigs in a row. And I got onto the stage one night thinking, oh, God, this is going to be terrible. I'm really tired. This is going to be a nightmare. And it was one of the best gigs I've ever done. And the rest of the band felt the same. We all had a fantastic show. Because we were so tired, we just got out of the way of it. There's a great series of books called The Inner Game that touch on this as well. The Inner Game books were written by a tennis coach who used to teach kids to play tennis. And when you give a tennis lesson, what you're supposed to do is say, okay, I'm going to throw the ball to you, rack it back, weight on the back foot, sideways onto the ball, keep your wrist stiff, move your weight onto the front foot, swing through the ball, finish high. Okay? Yeah, okay. What was the first instruction? And he said one day, there was a kid over the other side of the net, and he thought, this is stupid. He said, I'm going to throw the ball to you. I want you to hit it over there. No instructions. Threw the ball. The kid immediately did all the right things. Intuitively, his body instructed him to turn sideways onto it, swing through it, and lift it over the net. He said, I went home and I thought about this for quite a long while. And he came up with these ideas about performance, and he was talking about the conscious part of your mind that always judges you and always gives you instructions. Oh, you've got to be good now. Oh, here comes the really difficult part of the solo. That kind of thing. And he said, if you can learn to quieten that part of your mind and allow your body to do what it knows how to do, you will be better. You will be better more often, more betterer, more oftener. And he expanded this, and he wrote an inner game of music for musicians, primarily aimed at classical musicians, who were saying things like, I can play this passage in my practice room perfectly, but as soon as I get on stage, I mess it up. And he said, well, that's nothing to do with this. That's everything to do with this. And usually people mess it up because they care too much. It's too important to them. They attach too much importance to absolute perfection. And that's a certain way to make sure you don't achieve that perfection. And this stuff's kind of hard to put into words and even harder to teach. But I'm persevering. I do mentoring days for musicians who have problems like this, where we address this. And it's always in the mind. It's never in the hands. It's always in the mind. And I don't know any university that teaches it. They teach you all how to play clever scales, but nobody teaches you what goes on in a musician's head when they're playing. And that has become a subject of fascination for me and future ongoing study, although not at the moment in a particularly formal way, but I would like to formalise it. I'm sort of halfway through a master's, and that's the subject I want to work on. It fascinates me. I have done performances myself that I know to be transcendent thing, to have been top class, and I know other people who have watched those performances and said, yeah, that was top class. And I know that I can't make it happen, but I recognise it when it happens. And just trying to understand it has been a fascinating journey and continues to be. There, you were probably expecting scurrilous tales from the dressing room. I'll finish, actually, with a favourite tale of mine from the dressing room. We were on tour, and we heard those dreaded words, the Spinal Tap moment, when the artist says, "Good news, guys! My wife's agreed to style the tour." You go, oh really? Oh, God. You know, the Janine moment from Spinal Tap. So we gathered in the dressing room to be presented with our clothes, and a parade of increasingly unsuitable clothes were trotted out. The main one of which was that the trumpet player, who spends all night like that, was handed a jacket so tight-fitting that it cut off the blood to his arms after raising his arms for 5 minutes. But the high point for me was when the drummer, who is about to spend 2.5 hours every night under hot lights doing extremely hard physical work, was handed a denim jacket. He looked at it and said, okay, needs a bit of alteration. And the stylist said, "Oh, it's fine, the wardrobe lady will do it for you." He said, no, it's all right, I'll do it myself. And in front of her horrified eyes, he ripped the arms off this very expensive denim jacket. Many more tales, most of which are probably untellable and unprintable. But thank you for listening. Bye-bye.